When my husband died, I thought the world had already taken everything from me. I didn't know the real thief was sitting across from me at breakfast, calling me, Mom. When my stepdaughter sold my jewelry, she thought she had won. She thought she had stripped me of the last pieces of him. But what she sold were only shells. And what I gained was everything my husband had ever hidden. She sold gold. I inherited vengeance. The day after Daniel's funeral, I woke up to silence so thick I thought I'd gone deaf. No footsteps, no coffee brewing, no low hum of his morning radio. Just the echo of his absence. Grief is strange that way. It amplifies the smallest details, turns them into ghosts. The bed beside me was cold, untouched. I traced the dent on his pillow with trembling fingers and whispered his name, Daniel, as if the sound alone could bring him back. That's when I heard the doorbell. I opened the door to see Sophie, her eyes swollen from crying, or pretending to. She stood there with a suitcase and a hopeful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hi, Linda, she said, her voice almost breaking. I thought, maybe you shouldn't be alone right now. I wanted to say no. I wanted to be alone in my grief, to drown quietly in it. But Daniel's voice lived somewhere inside me, always soft and reasonable. She's my daughter Lynn. She needs family. So I stepped aside. Come in. She moved past me like she already belonged. The first few days were harmless enough. She helped clean, sorted Daniel's things, and spent hours talking about how much she missed her father. At night she'd sit by the fireplace sipping wine saying how unfair life was. I agreed. There were moments when I almost felt grateful for her company. We laughed, cooked together, even went through old photo albums. But beneath her sympathy there was something. A flicker in her eyes every time she looked at Daniel's possessions. A quiet calculation. One night as we sat by the fire she asked, So what happens to the house now? I mean legally. I looked up from my cup. The house was left to me, I said. Daniel made sure of that. She nodded slowly, eyes darkening. Of course. You were his wife. But her tone wasn't admiration. It was resentment wrapped in politeness. Days blurred into weeks. I spent most mornings in Daniel's office, trying to make sense of the endless paperwork. Sophie began taking more initiative around the house. Redecorating, rearranging, helping. She said she wanted to freshen things up. But one day when I entered the living room I froze. Daniel's portrait, the one from our wedding anniversary, was gone. I found it later in the storage room, leaning against a box. When I asked Sophie about it she laughed. Oh. I thought it might be too sad for you to look at all the time. Her answer was smooth, but something inside me twisted. Daniel's photo wasn't hers to move. The first item that disappeared was my silver bracelet. A simple piece not worth much to anyone but me. Daniel had given it to me on our 5th anniversary, engraved with our initials. L&D. I searched everywhere, drawers, the jewelry box, the bathroom sink. It was gone. When I asked Sophie if she'd seen it, she shrugged. Maybe you misplaced it? You've been so tired lately. I wanted to believe her. I told myself grief makes people forgetful. But something didn't sit right. Then 2 weeks later a gold locket vanished. Then a pair of pearl earrings. Then my mother's ring. Each time Sophie's answer was the same. You must have lost it. And each time her voice sounded less like concern and more like mockery. One morning while dusting Daniel's study, I found a receipt tucked between some papers on the desk. My hand shook as I read it. Cash for gold $2,400. Date, 3 days ago. Name Sophie Daniels. For a long time I couldn't breathe. My heart beat in my throat, my palms turned cold. She had sold them. My jewelry. My memories. I didn't confront her immediately. Something inside me, something colder than rage, told me to wait. To watch. That evening she came home humming, carrying shopping bags. She wore a new coat, expensive shoes, her nails freshly done. Oh, she said when she saw me, pretending to be surprised. You're up early. I was just out running errands. I smiled, my lips trembling. Did they pay you well? Her eyes flickered just for a second. Then she laughed. What do you mean? I looked her straight in the eye. The jewelry, Sophie. The pieces you sold. She froze. Then slowly she smiled. Well, she said softly, leaning against the counter. It's not like you needed them. They were just things. Old things. My heart broke, not because she sold them but because she said they were just things. She didn't understand what she had touched. Those weren't jewels. They were my last connection to Daniel. But I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply said, "You're right, Sophie. They're just things." That night I went to Daniel's safe. The code was still the same, our anniversary date. Inside, among the files and envelopes, was a small black notebook with his handwriting. It wasn't labeled, just his initials to see. As I opened it, I found diagrams, drawings of my jewelry. Each piece carefully sketched, labeled, annotated. My bracelet, the diamond pendant, the gold locket. Each had a small red mark near the clasp or gemstone. And beside it, Daniel had written, "Encrypted microchip secured inside each setting. Do not disclose. Access key, L5D7AR." I stared at the page until the words blurred. Microchips? What could he have possibly hidden in them? Then it hit me. Daniel had worked for a private defense contractor before retiring. He often mentioned projects he couldn't discuss. Investments, digital assets, hidden accounts. And suddenly I understood. Those jewelry pieces weren't just gifts. They were safes. Tiny, delicate containers of secrets. I sat there for hours, the truth sinking in like ice through my veins. Sophie had no idea what she'd sold. She thought she'd stolen gold, but she'd thrown away a fortune. I could have gone to the police. I could have told her the truth. But where was the justice in that? Daniel had trusted me to protect what he'd hidden. And now it was time to protect it and him. Over the next few days, I played the role of the grieving fool perfectly. I smiled, made tea, even asked Sophie to help me go through more of Daniel's belongings. She was cheerful, almost smug. One evening, as we sat in the living room, she boasted, "You know, I actually make quite a bit selling your old stuff. There's this collector downtown who pays top dollar for vintage jewelry." I looked at her calmly. "I'm happy for you, dear." Inside, though, a quiet, sharp satisfaction bloomed. Because I already knew that the collector she spoke of would soon be facing a federal inquiry for purchasing stolen data drives. Daniel's encryption wasn't ordinary. It was government-level security. Those chips weren't just about money. They held proof, digital trails of Daniel's offshore accounts, shell companies, and hidden investments, all now linked directly to me. Sophie had sold jewels, but I was about to inherit empires. That night, when she went to bed, I stood outside her door for a long time. I could hear her soft, contented breathing. I whispered through the crack, "You took what you thought was mine, Sophie. But you'll soon learn. You can't steal from a ghost." Then I walked back to Daniel's study, opened his notebook, and dialed the number written on the last page. A man answered, his voice formal and low. "Mrs. Collins?" "Yes," I said. "This is Thomas Grant from Sterling Private Bank. I've been waiting for your call." When I hung up the phone that night, the world felt heavier, but not with sorrow. With purpose. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt awake. Thomas Grant's voice echoed in my mind. "Mrs. Collins, your husband set up several trust accounts. They are encrypted and tied to specific authentication devices. From what I can see, those devices were hidden inside jewelry pieces registered under your name." He paused. "We've been waiting for confirmation that you still have access." I didn't tell him they were gone. Not yet, because the pieces might have been sold, but the codes were still mine. The next morning, Sophie hummed as she made coffee, wearing one of Daniel's old shirts like it belonged to her. I watched her move around my kitchen, confident, entitled, completely unaware of the storm gathering around her. "Sleep well?" I asked softly. She turned, flashing that careless smile. "Like a baby. You should try it sometime." Her arrogance made me want to laugh. The same girl who cried crocodile tears at Daniel's grave was now living like a queen in his house, spending his widow's money, selling his legacy. I smiled faintly. "Maybe I will." She poured her coffee, oblivious, and walked off to take a call. I could hear her voice from the hallway, cheerful, animated. "Yeah, I sold all of it. The old lady didn't even notice. Can you believe? Probably thinks her dead husband's ghost misplaced them." I stood frozen in the doorway. Each word was a blade. I had heard enough. That afternoon, I opened Daniel's study again. The sunlight poured through the curtains, landing on the mahogany desk. I took out the black notebook, flipping through the diagrams, decoding the notes carefully. Daniel had left detailed instructions, backup passphrase, verification codes, bank coordinates. He must have known somehow that one day I'd need them. Under one diagram, my diamond pendant, he had scribbled something faint in pencil. Primary key, hidden in plain sight. Engraved beneath the setting. For L, my forever secret. My throat tightened. I remembered that pendant. Sophie had always admired it, called it old-fashioned. I used to wear it on special occasions, dinners, anniversaries, the day Daniel proposed to me again on our 10th year. She sold it for a great price. She had no idea she'd handed over millions. The following days I pretended nothing was wrong. I cooked her favorite meals, smiled during breakfast, even listened as she bragged about redecorating the guest room. But when she wasn't looking, I made calls. Quiet ones. The first was to Sterling Private Bank again. I gave Thomas the authentication phrase Daniel left me. The line went silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Mrs. Collins, confirmation accepted. You are the primary beneficiary of all accounts. Would you like me to activate transfer rights?" I swallowed hard. "Yes. Understood. It will take a few days. You'll be contacted for signature verification." I thanked him and hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was justice, the kind that waits patiently like frost before dawn. A week passed. Sophie began acting stranger, restless, irritable. She'd leave early in the mornings, return late at night. Her new clothes were designer. She smelled of expensive perfume. Her phone was always glued to her hand. One evening I saw her outside by the car, speaking urgently into her phone. "No, listen," she hissed. "I sold everything, but she's weirdly calm. Maybe she doesn't even know the value. Just a few old trinkets. Stop worrying." She laughed. Then lowering her voice, "I'll get more. She's got papers in his office. Docs maybe. I'll find them." My pulse thudded in my ears. She wasn't done. She was planning to rob me again. And I wasn't going to stop her, not yet. That night, I locked Daniel's office and hid the key. I wasn't protecting the papers, I was baiting her. The next morning, I forgot the key on the hallway table before leaving for the grocery store. When I returned 2 hours later, the key was gone. I didn't confront her. I simply waited until midnight, then slipped silently to the office door. The faint glow of light leaked through the crack. Inside, Sophie sat at the desk, rifling through Daniel's files. Her hands shook as she flipped papers, muttering to herself, "There has to be something. A will, a deed, anything." I watched from the shadows until she finally looked up and froze. I stepped forward. "Looking for something, sweetheart?" She jolted, guilt flashing across her face before she replaced it with fake indignation. "You scared me. I was just organizing. Organizing my husband's private files at midnight?" Her mouth opened then closed. "I see," I whispered. "Well, next time, maybe try asking before you break into a dead man's secrets." She glared at me, her mask cracking. "You're paranoid. Maybe you shouldn't be alone if you're starting to imagine things." I didn't reply. I just stared until she stormed past me, slamming her door. When she was gone, I entered the office. The drawers were a mess, but Daniel's notebook was still there, hidden in a false bottom. She hadn't found it, but she would try again. And this time I would let her. The following evening, the bank called again. "Mrs. Collins," Thomas said, "the verification is complete. All accounts have been successfully transferred to your name. The total sum is..." He paused as if hesitant. $8.6 million, plus assets from 3 offshore trusts. I felt the breath leave my body. Daniel, my quiet, humble husband, had left me a fortune beyond my imagination. And Sophie, in her greed, had thrown away the keys to it. I thanked him, tears burning my eyes. "Please keep this information confidential for now." "Of course, Mrs. Collins. Your husband trusted you. So do we." When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at Daniel's photo. "Did you know she'd do this?" I whispered. "Did you plan it this way?" I almost expected his smile to answer. 2 days later, Sophie made her move. I woke to the sound of drawers slamming. When I entered the living room, she was stuffing clothes into a suitcase. "Leaving so soon?" I asked, leaning against the doorway. She looked up, startled, then sneered. "I got a better offer. Someone who appreciates me." I raised an eyebrow. Someone like the man who bought my jewelry? Her eyes flickered. You've been snooping. I don't need to snoop to see what's right in front of me. She zipped her suitcase violently. You know what? You can have your dusty memories in your stupid house. I'm done playing nursemaid. She stormed toward the door, dragging her bag. I didn't stop her. But as she grabbed the doorknob, I said quietly, You might want to check the news tomorrow, Sophie. She turned, frowning. Why? I smiled. Because the buyer of your old trinkets just got arrested for possession of stolen federal data. Her face drained of color. What are you talking about? Oh, didn't you know? I said softly, stepping closer. Those jewelry pieces you sold contained encrypted chips. My husband was smarter than you ever gave him credit for. Her lips trembled. You're lying. Am I? She stood frozen for a moment, then bolted, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, the headlines confirmed everything. Local collector arrested for trafficking classified data drives. My phone buzzed with messages from investigators, lawyers, and the bank. The chips had been traced back to Daniel's encryption codes, all legally tied to me. The authorities confirmed I was not under investigation, as the items were stolen property recovered in the raid. But Sophie was not so lucky. Her name was on every transaction, every sale, every transfer. Within a week, she was called in for questioning. When she returned to the house, pale, furious, desperate, she threw open the door and screamed, What did you do to me? I stood calmly by the fireplace, the glow of the flames painting gold across Daniel's portrait. I didn't do anything, I said softly. You sold what wasn't yours. The law just caught up. Her voice broke. You knew. You let me sell them. Why didn't you stop me? I looked at her for a long moment. Because, I said finally, you needed to learn the difference between stealing and losing. Tears filled her eyes. You ruined my life. I shook my head. No, Sophie. You ruined your own. I just didn't save you this time. She sank to her knees, sobbing. For a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. Then I remembered how she'd laughed about selling my memories, and my heart turned to stone. That night, after she left for the last time, I sat alone by the window. The rain fell softly outside, tapping against the glass like fingers of the past. Daniel's notebook lay open on my lap, the final page filled with his handwriting, a note I'd never seen before. If you're reading this, Lynn, then you've found the truth. Everything I built for you. The world will try to take what's yours. Let them. They'll only find gold. You'll still have the real treasure. I pressed my hand against the page, tears blurring the ink. He had known. And he had trusted me to finish what he started. That was the night I made a decision. I wouldn't hide anymore. I wouldn't play the grieving widow or the foolish stepmother. I was the keeper of Daniel's legacy now, and I would protect it the way he protected me. With patience. With strength. And if necessary, with vengeance. The bank called again the next morning. Mrs. Collins, the transfer is complete. Would you like to come in and finalize your portfolio? I smiled faintly. Yes. I'll be there today. As I hung up, I looked around the quiet house. The house Sophie had tried to claim. The one Daniel built with his own hands. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. But what Sophie didn't know was that Daniel had hidden one last secret. One even I hadn't uncovered yet. And soon I would. Because this story wasn't finished. Not yet. After Sophie left the house that night, silence returned, but it was no longer the kind that suffocated me. It was earned peace. The kind that follows a long, quiet war. For days I barely spoke to anyone. I spent hours sitting in Daniel's study, tracing the outlines of his handwriting, rereading every note, every hidden message. The walls of the house seemed to breathe with him again. Faint echoes of his calm voice, his unshakable patience, the way he always said, "Some lessons life teaches through loss." I had thought that lesson was his death. But I was wrong. It was this, the unveiling of truth. A week later, I was called into Sterling Private Bank to sign the final documents. The building was grand, polished marble floors and soft echoes of wealth in the air. The receptionist led me to a private conference room. Thomas Grant, the man I'd spoken to on the phone, greeted me with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Collins," he said, shaking my hand warmly, "it's an honor to finally meet you in person. I must say, your husband was a very careful man. He always was, I replied softly. Thomas gestured for me to sit. Before we finalize the portfolio, there's something else we discovered while verifying your husband's encryption codes. He opened a sleek black folder and slid it toward me. This, he said, is a sealed account. It required dual authentication, yours and a secondary key that your husband registered before his death. It's labeled Legacy Project. I frowned. Legacy Project? Yes. Inside is not just monetary value but something else. Files, encrypted notes, possibly related to his company's research. We're unable to access them without your consent. I felt a shiver run through me. Can you show me what's inside? Thomas nodded and inserted a small flash drive into his laptop. A series of encrypted codes filled the screen, followed by Daniel's voice, his recorded message. If you're hearing this, Lynn, then it means I'm gone and you found what I left behind. I didn't want to burden you with the truth while I was alive. But some things are safer in the hands of those who understand love, not greed. My breath caught. His voice warm, familiar, alive again. There's money here, yes. But there's more: documents, shares, and proof of illegal siphoning by my former partners. They tried to silence me. I created this system to protect you. If anything ever happens to me, the evidence will surface automatically, but only when both keys are verified. Thomas looked up. Your verification triggered that process. The files have now been submitted to federal investigators. I stared at him. So, Daniel's death. Thomas hesitated. Officially, it was cardiac arrest. But unofficially, it might not have been natural. His former partners are under investigation now. A slow chill crept down my spine. He knew, I whispered. He knew they would come for him. Yes, Thomas said quietly. And he made sure his wife would be protected, and that the guilty would be exposed. I walked out of the bank that afternoon into the bright sunlight, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in months, they weren't tears of grief. Daniel had left me not just wealth but justice. He'd turned his love into a weapon that would strike long after he was gone. And Sophie, the woman who tried to steal from me, had unknowingly triggered that very weapon. She had sold the jewelry that contained the proof. And in doing so, she had set everything in motion. 3 days later, a detective came to the house. He was polite but serious. Mrs. Collins, I'm Detective Harris. We've concluded the investigation into the items sold by Miss Sophie Daniels. I invited him in, my pulse steady. He sat across from me, flipping through a file. As you may already know, the buyer she dealt with was part of a network that handled stolen encrypted materials. What Ms. Daniels didn't realize is that those materials led us directly to a large-scale corporate fraud case. Your late husband's company. He glanced at me, gauging my reaction. I said nothing. He continued, your stepdaughter's name appears in the sales chain, but due to your statement and the clear evidence of her ignorance, the charges were reduced to restitution and theft. However, he paused. Her actions revealed critical evidence. Without her, the case might have stayed buried. I gave a faint, almost poetic smile. So in a way, her greed served justice. The detective smiled slightly. You could say that. The government will be releasing funds owed to your husband's estate. You're listed as sole beneficiary. When he left, I stood in the doorway, the autumn wind curling around me. Sophie's betrayal had burned me to ashes, but from those ashes, Daniel's legacy had risen. That night, I received a message. From Sophie. It was short, bitter, almost pitiful. Sophie, I lost everything. The money, my job, my reputation. They think I was part of a crime. I can't even get an apartment now. Are you happy? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Me, no, Sophie. I'm not happy. But I am at peace. There was no answer. And for the first time, I didn't care. Weeks turned into months. I learned to live again. Not as Daniel's widow, not as Sophie's victim, but as myself. I donated half the money to a foundation for widows of veterans. The rest I invested in small businesses Daniel once admired. The house no longer felt haunted, it felt alive. But one rainy afternoon, as I was organizing Daniel's study, I found something strange. Behind the bottom drawer of his desk, taped to the wood, was a small velvet pouch. Inside it was a simple gold ring I'd never seen before. Engraved inside were 3 tiny words. For the last key. My heart raced. I took it to a jeweler the next morning. He examined it under a magnifying glass and looked up, puzzled. There's something inside this band like a microchip. I smiled faintly. Could you open it carefully? When he did, he revealed a chip identical to the ones in the jewelry Sophie had sold. I brought it home, inserted it into my laptop, and entered the same encryption phrase Daniel had left in his notebook. The screen blinked. Then a single message appeared, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Lynn, if you found this, it means the circle is complete. The world took my breath, but you gave me life beyond death. This key holds one last thing. The deed to the property I bought under your maiden name. It's yours alone. The place where I wanted to grow old with you. Below it was an address. I gasped. It was a small coastal town, Havenport. A place we had once visited on a whim, where we'd walked the beach and dreamed of a house overlooking the sea. He'd bought it. For me. When I visited Havensport 2 weeks later, the air smelled of salt and peace. The house was small, white, with wildflowers climbing its porch railings. It was everything Daniel had promised, quiet, safe, eternal. I stood on the porch staring at the ocean and whispered, "Thank you, my love." The wind carried the sound away, as if delivering it to him. Months later I received one final letter. It was from Sophie. The handwriting was shaky, the paper stained. Linda, I don't expect forgiveness. I lost everything and maybe that's fair. But I wanted you to know, I didn't hate you. I just envied what you had with him. I thought stealing from you would make me feel powerful. Instead, it made me feel empty. I'm leaving the city to start over. If you ever think of me, I hope you remember the girl who called you mom once, not the one who destroyed everything. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it inside Daniel's notebook. Then I whispered, some debts can't be repaid, but some lessons are worth their price. Now, when I look at my reflection in the mirror, I see more than a widow. I see a survivor, the guardian of a love that outsmarted death and greed. People sometimes ask me about the jewelry, what happened to it, whether I ever replaced it. I always smile and say, no, I don't need ornaments anymore. My husband hid jewels in gold, but the real treasure was in what he left inside me. Wisdom, patience, and the courage to let time avenge me. Every night, I sit by the window of my seaside home, the ocean whispering against the shore. The stars reflect on the water, bright and countless, like scattered diamonds. Each one a memory, each one a promise. I no longer wear grief like a shroud. I wear it like armor, polished, strong, and gleaming. Sophie thought she sold my jewelry, but she only sold her soul. And in return, I gained something far greater. Truth, justice, and peace. Some treasures are hidden in gold, others in pain. But the rarest of all are hidden in forgiveness. For weeks I said nothing. The house had fallen eerily quiet again, as if Daniel's spirit had finally retreated into the walls, watching me in silence. Sophie no longer spoke to me unless she had to. She walked around with her phone glued to her hand, her voice rising with excitement whenever she talked about finally being free. She had no idea that her freedom was built on a mirage, and that the mirage was about to disappear. I started my morning sitting by the window with Daniel's old notebook in my lap. It wasn't really his journal, just a black leather-bound book that he used for scribbles, investment notes, and random numbers that once seemed meaningless to me. But now I stared at those lines as though they were pieces of a puzzle. A memory flashed, the night before his heart attack. Daniel had been sitting at his desk polishing a small ruby pendant. I teased him, "You treat my jewelry like it's made of secrets." And he'd smiled. "Maybe it is," he'd said softly. I had laughed it off back then. But now those words echoed in my mind like prophecy. One evening, as I sat in the same office, my eyes drifted to the old jewelry box Sophie had emptied. Only a few forgotten trinkets remained, a broken chain, a tarnished earring, and an old pearl brooch Daniel once said belonged to his grandmother. Something about that brooch felt different. I held it in my palm, turning it slowly under the lamp. Then when the light hit it just right, I saw a faint seam along the back. A tiny line, almost invisible. My heart began to pound. I reached for Daniel's small precision screwdriver, the one he used for his watches, and pressed gently at the seam. The back of the brooch lifted with a soft click. Inside, nestled in a hollow compartment, was a sliver of something metallic. A memory chip. For a moment I just stared at it. Then another memory surged forward. Daniel's old laptop password screen. Always asking for his encrypted key. I had never known what it unlocked. Until now. My hand shook as I inserted the chip into the computer. A file folder opened instantly. The title read, Private Accounts Confidential. I clicked. Inside were digital ledgers, encrypted bank statements, and offshore transfers. Dozens of them. Millions of dollars. And beneath it all a message. A simple text file titled, For my wife. If you're reading this, it means the jewelry has done its job. Each piece hides a part of what I couldn't tell anyone, not even you, until I knew you'd be safe. These are my clean investments, the ones I kept separate from the company, away from Sophie's mother's influence. I trusted you to find them if anything happened to me. Follow the path in the files. You'll know what to do. Daniel. I pressed my hand over my mouth, tears spilling freely. My husband. Always the meticulous planner. Always protecting me in ways I hadn't even realized. He knew. He had known what kind of person Sophie could become long before I did. The files contained instructions, account numbers, hidden holdings, even contact details for his personal financial lawyer. I followed every trail. It led me to accounts in Switzerland, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. The numbers were almost surreal, millions tucked away under my name, waiting for the right verification. But the real kicker? Every transaction record had digital proof of ownership, linked to the physical jewelry. Every ring, every pendant, every single piece Sophie had sold. 2 weeks later I received a call. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes, speaking. This is Laura from Merton Private Banking. I'm calling to confirm that we've received the final verification code from your late husband's encrypted portfolio. Congratulations. As of today, you are the primary beneficiary and sole controller of all associated investment accounts. My heart stopped. I'm sorry, what did you just say? She repeated it gently, as if speaking to someone in shock. Everything your husband left in trust. It's yours now, Mrs. Whitmore. All of it. I thanked her, somehow managing to sound calm, though my hands were trembling. When I hung up, the silence of the house roared in my ears. I stood by the window, looking at the garden Daniel had planted, the roses Sophie never bothered to water, and smiled for the first time in months. Sophie had sold trinkets for scraps of cash. She had traded her future for pocket change. She had thrown away the key to a kingdom. And I, the woman she thought she had outsmarted, now sat atop an empire my husband built in secret. That night I made dinner for both of us. I set the table the way Daniel liked. Candles, wine glasses, and a calm silence. Sophie appeared, hesitant, looking at me as if expecting confrontation. I smiled. Sit down, dear. She eyed me suspiciously but obeyed. I wanted to thank you, I said, pouring her a glass of wine. For what? She asked sharply. For helping me find what I'd been looking for. She frowned, confused. Your father's legacy, I added softly, raising my glass. Her brow furrowed. What legacy? I smiled faintly. Oh, don't worry. You wouldn't recognize it if you saw it. For the first time she looked uncertain. The confidence she had worn like perfume began to fade. She didn't know it yet, but her game was over. I didn't need to confront her about the theft. The universe already had. In her greed she had robbed herself. And soon she would discover just how much she'd lost.